How about some comments here from the top player in the NHL? Connor McDavid on improving his game said this to The Score, quote, "When the game gets tight and in those moments that really matter, I think those are two things that you can really dial into and focus on. You're never going to get in trouble out there when you're playing well defensively, winning faceoffs, and focusing on the full 200-foot game." Like this guy has any areas of to focus on. What do you make of his 200-foot game and maybe how his game has evolved in the first couple of years in the NHL?
It's improved. It's gotten better, but like every great player, he wants it better than good. And we already know the offensive side of things where he's most well known. He's miles and away the best player in the NHL. But defensively and face-offs, like it hasn't always been there. It hasn't been his focus. He's cheated on the offensive side of pucks to create offense. And I thought last year he actually took pretty significant strides defensively away from the puck, being much better. Now, he's not Patrice Bergeron, and he probably never will be. But he did take significant strides. And then as far as face-off goes, you know this. Face-offs are hard, no matter how good you are when you start in the NHL. Like, Connor McDavid's a great player, but he's a slight guy. He's not super strong, forearms, bulky. So it takes a while to figure out the league, figure out the importance of every face-off, get to used to the other centerman, the linesman. So not surprising that would take a little bit, but also not surprising that he's focusing on these parts of his game because he wants to become even more well-rounded than just the offensive dynamo.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to give Coach Tippett the flexibility, maybe to not, a lot of times Draisaitl will take the draws when they're out there together on the power play, but even 5-on-5. So that'll add just another notch for him on his belt in terms of the things that he could bring. The effort for me defensively was absolutely there last year, and he did make huge strides, as you said earlier. But I think he can sharpen his focus a little bit there still. And when you are the best player in the world, you got to keep driving yourself forward. You got to have things that you're working on, especially if you want to be a great captain. And one thing about Connor, he wants to be great at all of it, but he mostly just wants to win. And I think this is his way of expressing that.
One interesting thing, having played sometimes in a defensive role, if you can defend against other teams' best players, you get easy offense. And so to think if you can put McDavid out there against a guy who might be thinking offensive primarily, then he could take advantage and go the other way. And the other part about it, Zach Hyman's his new winger. Zach Hyman is a pretty proficient defensive winger as well, not afraid to go down low in his own end. Yeah. So if he gets a good rapport with Hyman, then that maybe help him defensively, also alleviate some of the responsibility if he's not the first guy back at his own end, where he doesn't have to take that on every single time on the ice. But that's bad news because he's going to play 24 minutes a night, and Draisaitl's going to play 23. So there's, three-quarters of the game is gone between those two. And if he can lock it down defensively and then does what he does offensively, what do you do? Yikes. What do you do against a guy like that?
Right.
You got to try to win the game in the 12 minutes those guys are on the ice. That's hard to do.
Numbers-wise, is there room for number 97 to improve his overall game, do you think?
Yes, there is. And he's the best player on the planet. We know that. One of the things as well that he talked about after that quote was wanting to, stop on pucks a little more instead of flying by, get in more battles to try to be better defensively. And so one thing I looked at is, well, how many battles does he get in defensive battles in the D zone, neutral zone, relative to the other guys that score a bunch of points? Because you don't want to compare him to, grinders. You want to compare him to elite offensive players. And looking last season, defensive neutral zone puck battles, he was 169th among forwards. You see Draisaitl and Matthews, they get in a lot of these battles. Marchand and Marner, not so much. So it's not like you have to do it if you're an elite offensive player. It's more just the kind of type of player that you are. But for Connor McDavid, yes, there's room that he can improve defensively. And I think back to the last couple of postseasons, there's been critical battles or mistakes made that have worked against the Oilers. You're losing a battle here, the opening game against the Chicago Blackhawks in the qualifying series, and turnover that led to an overtime goal, the series clinching goal for the Winnipeg Jets. So there are areas McDavid can improve in. Again, he's so good. He's already the best player in the world. I love the fact that he wants to get better, but I don't think he needs to try to turn into a Selke-type player. As you take a look at his percentile ranks, he's the best playmaker in the league, the best puck mover. That defense is kind of average. If he can kick it up a little bit more, hey, why not?
Yeah, and I think that the defense actually did improve a little bit last year. Like, he took some strides from 2 years ago where he was even more likely to go for the poke and go and fly by. And I guess when he's so fast, his inclination is, I don't want to stop, because if I get it in flight, nobody in the NHL can stop me.
Yeah.
But I think there are moments, again, and it's not all the time, but it's read and recognize, and that's what he'll be focusing on. Moments when it's time to stop, dig in, get the defensive side of the pucks, and then there are moments where maybe he has support underneath and he can go for maybe a slightly higher risk. But that's just all part of the learning process, and also the process for many great offensive players who come in the league. They want to show that they can do one thing, score. They don't want to show, I can stop. I'm here to score. I want to show I can score. He's proven that he can do that better than anyone in the last 30 years. But now he's going to add the other parts of the game. And the other thing about that one board, too, had Draisaitl on there. He had Matthews, way higher than McDavid. McDavid was more like Marner and Marchand. They're wingers. They don't get in as many battles down below the guy. So he really should be comparing him to the centerman because they're the guys that are generally around the puck more often in their own end.
If he's focusing on more attention to detail in his own end, does that take away from some of the spectacular offensive skills that we see?
Very slightly. You might see some moments where, if he stops all the time, you won't have him with that burst of speed where he can turn guys. But coaches tell us all the time, and the numbers back it up. In many ways, whether it's creating more turnovers, like imagine him on the back pressure. If he can create a turnover and go the other way, like the better defense you play, oftentimes the more and easier offense you can create. And so you might see less highlight reel goals, but if you see more possession and the puck on his stick, then that will result in more offense for McDavid and the Oilers.
And the ultimate goal?
More wins.
So we'll see how that one plays out. All right, last season, speaking of McDavid, Mike, blew away the field when it came to points in a very shortened season. Hopefully back to normal this year, back to our regular 82-game schedule. Get out the Mike Kelly
200.
crystal ball.
Give me 200.
You want 200 games or points?
Points.
Oh, okay. Well, Mike's going to, I was like, yeah, we'll settle down here. We'd be exhausted. Get out the crystal ball, the projection. Based on an 82-game season, who are going to be some of the top scorers points-wise in the league this year?
Yeah, so put the model together already for my player projections for the season coming up. And shocker, Connor McDavid looks to be the guy to score more points than anybody. I got him at 130 points. Leon Draisaitl second. Kucherov, I think, is in for a big year. These are actually the only five players that I've got at over 100 points. So Panarin and Nathan McKinnon in that mix as well.
Mike, why Connor McDavid, who had 100 and only 56, didn't even play the full 56 this year, why fewer points per game over an 82-game season for Connor McDavid on the projections for next year?
So interesting thing about that is it's a model that not only looks at how many points he had, points per game, but also expected goals, expected assists, what we believe he should have based on those expected results. That's part of it. But we're also looking back at the last couple of years in a weighted model where obviously he didn't score at that rate, so expecting it to normalize somewhat. The flip side is the trend has been he's gone like this. So who am I to say where McDavid slows down? He might score more points. It could. I wouldn't put it past him.
And if you think he outperformed expected goals last year, he got Zach Hyman on his team. He did not have him last year. He didn't get to play with him a whole bunch. So maybe he might even have, a more consistent, higher-end winger to play with. I don't know. 130, I feel that low. I'm taking the over all day long, Mikey. I'm taking the over on your weighted model all day long.
There was a 70-point discrepancy between his projection.
On it, Johnny.
All right, good. Wager done.
A quick steak dinner? What do we got?
I'll bet you on it because I think he's going to get 130 points and kick that defensive game up a notch. He's going to sacrifice a little bit.
Okay.
Keep the tape.
He's going to do both, and I'll be very hungry and thirsty that night.
All right.